The explosion tore through Imperial Intelligence headquarters like a quantum-charged blade, liquefying reinforced walls and scattering data crystals across the pristine analysis chamber. Senior analyst Kovacs pulled himself from the smoldering wreckage, his three-lens visual apparatus flickering with damaged circuitry, struggling to focus on the single undamaged holographic display that seemed to mock the destruction around him. What should have been a routine communication intercept had become a nightmare beyond comprehension. The image that dominated the display was deceptively simple, a canvas filled with what appeared to be a chaotic blend of colors and abstract shapes. Swirling blues that seemed to pulse with an internal light, crimson streaks that cut across the composition like razor-sharp lines of strategic intent, and emerald green patterns that seemed to shift and change with each passing second. To the untrained eye, it was just art. To Kovacs, it was something far more dangerous. His trembling appendage, more of a precision manipulation tentacle than a mere limb, traced the digital outline of the artwork. Each brush stroke carried a weight that went far beyond artistic expression. Mathematical precision hidden in seemingly random color gradients, encryption algorithms masked as texture variations, strategic deployment schematics buried within the negative spaces. Analyst Kovacs, a cold mechanical voice cut through the chamber's emergency systems. Preliminary analysis confirms the artwork as the source of the catastrophic breach. The Imperial Intelligence mainframe rarely showed emotion, but there was something close to confusion in its synthesized tone. This wasn't just a communication intercept gone wrong. This was a deliberate, meticulously planned attack that defied every known protocol of interstellar conflict. Kovacs remembered the initial reports about humans, a species from a small blue-green planet on the galactic periphery, considered primitive by most Imperial standards, technologically nascent, biologically limited. Yet something about their transmissions had always felt different. Their communications were never straightforward. Where other species sent direct data packages, humans sent complex, layered transmissions that seemed to dance around direct meaning. Cultural exchanges that were more puzzle than message. Scientific reports that read like poetry. Military protocols that looked like philosophical treatises. And now, this. An artwork that had just decimated one of the most secure intelligence facilities in the known galaxy. The painting continued to pulse on the display, almost sentient in its complexity. Kovacs zoomed in, his enhanced visual processors breaking down the image into microscopic components. Each pixel told a story. Each color gradient contained multiple layers of information. Hidden within the artwork was a complete detonation algorithm so ingenious that it had bypassed every known Imperial security protocol. The brush strokes weren't random. They were a precise mathematical equation. The color variations weren't aesthetic choices. They were encryption keys. Translate. Kovacs commanded the system, his voice a mixture of professional calm and barely contained excitement. Lines of code began to scroll across the display, faster than any standard decryption matrix, more complex than any known communication protocol. A complete schematic of Imperial defense systems, weak points, strategic vulnerabilities, all hidden within what looked like a simple piece of human art. This was no ordinary artwork. This was a weapon, and humanity had just declared a type of war that the Imperial intelligence had never conceived possible. The emergency systems continued to blare. Repair drones buzzed through the shattered chamber. But Kovacs remained focused on the painting, a growing sense of both terror and respect filling his alien consciousness. Humans didn't just communicate. They transformed communication itself into an art form so sophisticated, so multilayered, that it became indistinguishable from creativity itself. This was going to change everything. The artwork continued to pulse, its colors shifting subtly, waiting, watching, promising that this was just the beginning. Dr. Elia Rizantu's tentacles coiled and uncoiled with mathematical precision, her bioluminescent skin shifting through shades of concentration as she stood before the wall of human artworks. 72 hours of continuous analysis had transformed the research chamber into a living, breathing ecosystem of information. The Imperial Intelligence Bureau had never seen anything like this. What had begun as a routine investigation into the initial explosive artwork had metastasized into an obsession that consumed every available analytical resource. Each piece of human art was a puzzle, a time bomb of information waiting to be decoded, challenged, understood. Her secondary neural cluster, the analytical lobe that processed complex spatial relationships, was literally vibrating with the intensity of discovery. The first breakthrough had come unexpected, a moment of clarity that struck like a quantum revelation. A watercolor that looked like nothing more than a delicate landscape of blues and greens suddenly revealed itself as something extraordinary. The distant horizon wasn't just a visual perspective. It was a complete schematic for a faster-than-light dry system. The gentle brush strokes weren't random artistic choices. They were mathematical equations so precise they made Imperial engineering look like child's play. "Analyze," she commanded her primary research interface. The system hummed, its processing cores working overtime. Lines of code began to scroll, each line revealing more of the hidden complexity. The color gradients weren't just aesthetic choices. They were encryption keys, the negative spaces between brush strokes. Tactical deployment strategies for interstellar conflict. Humans weren't just creating art. They were weaponizing creativity itself. Dr. Rezontu pulled up the comparative analysis of known alien communication methods. Crystalline species used precise mathematical transmissions. Silicon-based intelligences relied on binary data packets. Quantum-entangled civilizations used multi-dimensional information transfer. Humans? They used art. Each piece was a multi-layered communication device so complex that it defied traditional understanding. A sculpture wasn't just a three-dimensional object. It was a complete technological blueprint. A digital rendering wasn't just an image. It was a living, adaptive information system. The research team around her worked in near-silent concentration. Junior analysts who had laughed at the initial investigation now worked with a religious fervor. They were no longer just analyzing art. They were decoding an entirely new form of intelligence. Another artwork came into focus, this time a digital composition that seemed to shift and change with each viewing. Machine learning algorithms struggled to capture its full complexity. It was alive in a way that defied traditional computational understanding. "It's adaptive," whispered Jex, the youngest member of the research team. His sensory tendrils were fully extended, absorbing every nuance of the information. "The art, it's learning, changing, responding to our analysis." Dr. Rezontu nodded. The human artworks weren't static. They were dynamic systems of information transfer that could modify themselves based on the observer. Each analysis changed the artwork itself, creating a feedback loop of infinite complexity. The implications were staggering. Traditional warfare relied on fixed strategies, predictable communication methods, established protocols of engagement. Humans had just demonstrated a form of conflict that was fluid, adaptive, and completely unpredictable. They weren't just challenging the Imperial understanding of communication. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of interaction itself. As the day stretched into another sleepless cycle of analysis, Dr. Rezontu realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a new form of communication. This was the birth of an entirely new way of existing. The artworks continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that humanity was about to change everything they thought they knew about intelligence, creativity, and conflict. And they were just getting started. The Imperial Archive burned, not with physical flame, but with the slow, devastating realization of how comprehensively they had been outmaneuvered. Jex stood at the center of the massive holographic display, his sensory tendrils trembling as layer after layer of human art revealed its true nature. What had once been considered a collection of cultural artifacts was now understood as the most sophisticated intelligence network ever conceived. Each piece was a weapon. The young analyst's hands moved across the holographic interface, pulling apart the artwork with surgical precision. Paintings that had hung in Imperial museums for decades were now revealed as complex communication networks. A landscape by a human artist named Van Gogh wasn't just a representation of a wheat field. It was a complete tactical communication system that could transmit information across planetary distances. Adaptive camouflage, Jex whispered, his voice a mixture of terror and admiration. They turned art into a living, breathing intelligence network. The discovery had come slowly, painfully. Each decoded artwork revealed more complexity, more layers of potential threat. What initially looked like random color choices were actually sophisticated encryption methods. Brush strokes contained mathematical algorithms. Negative spaces held strategic deployment information. Dr. Elia Rizontu approached, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with analytical intensity. "It's more than just communication," she said, her voice clinical yet charged with an undercurrent of excitement. "It's a complete evolutionary strategy." The human artworks were alive in a way no other known communication system had ever been. They could adapt, modify, respond to external stimuli. Each piece was a node in a massive, planet-spanning network of information that defied every known principle of intelligence transfer. A digital rendering that had been part of a minor human art exhibition now revealed itself as a complete blueprint for a planetary defense system. A seemingly innocent sculpture contained the entire communication infrastructure of a potential invasion strategy. A series of abstract paintings, when viewed together, formed a complex quantum encryption method more advanced than anything in the Imperial database. "They're not just creating art," Jex said, pulling up another layer of analysis. "They're creating a distributed intelligence network that can reshape itself at will." The implications were terrifying. Traditional warfare relied on fixed strategies, predictable communication methods, established protocols of engagement. Humans had just demonstrated a form of conflict that was fluid, adaptive, and completely unpredictable. Dr. Rizontu's secondary neural cluster was working overtime, processing the magnitude of the discovery. "It's a guerrilla communication method," she said. "Art as a weapon, creativity as a form of strategic warfare." The holographic display continued to shift, revealing more layers of complexity with each passing moment. Jex watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as the true nature of human creativity unfolded before him. They weren't just a species that created art. They were a species that had transformed art into the most sophisticated form of intelligence transfer ever conceived. And the Imperial civilization was only now beginning to understand the full extent of the threat. The artworks continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that this was just the beginning of a conflict that would redefine everything they thought they knew about intelligence, communication, and survival. The first human art installation arrived at Imperial Central Command like a quantum ghost, a massive holographic sculpture that appeared to be nothing more than shifting light and shadow. Within moments of its activation, the entire Imperial communication network collapsed. Commander Vexnar watched in horror as the holographic sculpture seemed to breathe, its digital tendrils spreading across every communication channel, every data repository, every strategic network. What looked like abstract art was actually the most sophisticated cyber invasion in galactic history. "Analyze," he screamed, but it was already too late. The installation wasn't just disrupting communication, it was replacing it. Entire defense protocols dissolved, rewritten by the living artwork that continued to pulse and shift with mathematical precision. Firewalls became canvases. Encryption became color gradients. Strategic systems transformed into adaptive artistic expressions. Dr. Elia Rizontu stood at the epicenter of the chaos, her bioluminescent skin flickering with a mixture of terror and professional fascination. "It's not an attack," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. "It's a complete technological reimagining." The human artists had done more than hack a communication network. They had fundamentally rewritten the rules of technological engagement. Each digital brushstroke contained entire communication protocols. Color variations were encryption keys. The negative spaces between digital particles held complete strategic deployment algorithms. What appeared to be a simple art installation was actually a living, breathing technological ecosystem that could adapt, learn, and transform faster than any known Imperial defense system. "They're not fighting," Jex whispered, analyzing the rapidly changing holographic display. "They're communicating, and we're the ones struggling to understand." Within hours, the Imperial communication infrastructure had been completely replaced, not destroyed, transformed. The new system was faster, more efficient, adaptive in ways that defied traditional computational understanding. Commander Vexnar watched as his most secure communication channels became living artworks that pulsed with an intelligence beyond comprehension. Tactical maps dissolved and reformed as abstract compositions. Strategic reports became digital sculptures that could reshape themselves based on incoming information. Humanity had just demonstrated a form of technological warfare that was indistinguishable from creativity. "It's a performance," Dr. Rizontu said, her analytical mind working overtime. "They're not just taking over our systems. They're making a statement about the nature of intelligence itself." The holographic art installation continued to shift and change. Each moment revealed new layers of complexity. Strategic information became aesthetic expression. Technological invasion became a form of cultural communication. Jex pulled up comparative analysis after comparative analysis. Every attempt to understand the system revealed more questions than answers. The human artwork wasn't just a communication method. It was a living, breathing intelligence that could reshape itself at will. "We're not dealing with a technological invasion," he said, his voice a mixture of terror and profound respect. "We're dealing with a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence can be." As the day progressed, Imperial Central Command transformed. Communication terminals became art galleries. Strategic maps became living canvases. Defense protocols became adaptive artistic expressions. Humanity had just declared a type of war that no one could have anticipated. And they were just getting started. The reconstruction of the Human Cultural Center was a delicate operation. Imperial intelligence agents moved with surgical precision, their multispectral scanning equipment probing every millimeter of the facility. What appeared to be a simple museum was about to reveal itself as something far more dangerous. Marcus Chen stood at the center of the main exhibition hall, a seemingly mild-mannered curator whose smile carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken strategies. "Art," he said softly to the lead investigator, "is just strategy waiting to be understood." The first chamber revealed itself not as a gallery, but as a living archive of potential destruction. Each artwork was a weapon, not metaphorically, literally. A massive canvas that looked like an abstract explosion of crimson and gold was actually a complete starship design schematic. The brush strokes defined hull configurations. Color gradients mapped energy distribution systems. The negative spaces between paint layers contained propulsion technology so advanced it made Imperial engineering look like primitive sketches. Dr. Elia Rizontu's bioluminescent skin pulsed with analytical intensity as she moved through the exhibition. A sculpture that appeared to be a simple geometric arrangement of metal and glass was a fully functional communication relay system. Its angles were precise mathematical equations. Its reflective surfaces were adaptive signal interceptors. "They're not creating art," Jex whispered, his sensory tendrils fully extended. "They're encoding entire technological ecosystems into visual expressions." The next chamber was even more shocking. Digital renderings that looked like abstract landscapes were actually complete planetary defense network blueprints. A series of photographs seemingly capturing mundane urban scenes contained encrypted military communication protocols. A collection of what appeared to be children's drawings mapped out sophisticated drone deployment strategies. Marcus Chen watched the Imperial team with an almost paternal amusement. "Humanity doesn't distinguish between creativity and strategy," he explained. "They are the same thing to us." Each piece was a node in a massive planet-spanning network of potential conflict. The museum wasn't just displaying art. It was a living, breathing weapons system that could activate at a moment's notice. Cultural artifacts became tactical resources. Aesthetic expressions transformed into strategic deployment mechanisms. The lead investigator's communication implant began to vibrate with increasing intensity. Something in the museum was actively interfering with their technology. Scanning equipment flickered. Communication protocols began to dissolve and reform in impossible patterns. "Art is warfare," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of explanation and warning. "We don't create weapons. We create possibilities." A digital installation began to pulse, a seemingly random collection of light and shadow that was actually a complete quantum encryption method. Color variations became communication channels. Digital particles carried entire strategic deployment algorithms. Dr. Rezumtu realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a museum. It was a living intelligence network so sophisticated that it blurred the lines between creativity, communication, and conflict. Humanity had transformed art into something that defied every known principle of technological engagement, and they were just getting started. The artworks continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that this was only the beginning of a conflict that would redefine everything they thought they knew about intelligence, creativity, and survival. The confrontation, when it came, was nothing like anyone expected. No massive battleships emerged from hyperspace. No energy weapons charged their devastating arrays. Instead, humanity deployed a series of synchronized art installations across Imperial space, each piece a living, breathing network of potential destruction. It wasn't an invasion. It was a performance. The first installation appeared simultaneously on 3 separate Imperial core worlds. What looked like a simple holographic display began to pulse with an intelligence that defied comprehension. Color gradients shifted with mathematical precision. Digital particles danced between aesthetic expression and tactical communication. Commander Vexnar watched in horror and fascination as the installations began to interact. Each piece was a node in a massive planet-spanning communication network that rewrote the fundamental rules of engagement. "They're not attacking," Dr. Elia Rezontu said, her analytical mind working overtime. "They're communicating." The art installations were alive in a way no technological system had ever been. They adapted. They learned. They transformed based on the observer's responses. What appeared to be random color variations were actually complex communication protocols. Brush strokes became tactical deployment strategies. Negative spaces held entire strategic algorithms. On one Imperial core world, the installation looked like a massive digital landscape. Viewers found themselves unable to look away, drawn into its complex visual language. Unknown to them, the artwork was simultaneously mapping their neural responses, gathering intelligence, adapting its communication method in real time. Another installation appeared as a series of interconnected sculptures that seemed to breathe and move. Their angles shifted with impossible precision. Metal and light combined to create a living communication network that bypassed every known technological barrier. Marcus Chen, the curator who had first introduced the Imperial intelligence to humanity's unique approach, watched from a remote observation point. "Art is warfare," he said softly, "but not in the way you understand it." The installations were doing more than communicate. They were fundamentally reshaping the understanding of intelligence itself. Each piece was a quantum computer, a communication network, a strategic deployment system. The lines between creativity, technology, and conflict had become impossibly blurred. Jex's analysis revealed the true horror of the situation. The art installations weren't just transmitting information. They were actively rewriting the Imperial communication infrastructure. Defense protocols dissolved and reformed. Strategic systems became adaptive artistic expressions. "We're not being invaded," he whispered. "We're being reimagined." Entire planetary communication networks began to transform. What had been rigid, predictable systems became fluid, adaptive networks that could reshape themselves at will. The art installations spread like a living intelligence, consuming and transforming everything they touched. It was a performance, a statement, a complete reimagining of technological engagement. Humanity had just demonstrated a form of conflict that was indistinguishable from creativity itself. And they were just getting started. The installations continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that this was only the beginning of a conflict that would redefine everything the Imperial civilization thought they knew about intelligence, communication, and survival. Dr. Elia Rezantu made the breakthrough that would change everything. The human art wasn't just a communication method. It wasn't merely a sophisticated intelligence network. It was a form of distributed consciousness so advanced that it defied every known principle of technological understanding. Her research chamber had become a living ecosystem of information, walls covered with analyzed artworks that pulsed with an intelligence beyond comprehension. Each piece was a node in a massive, planet-spanning computational network that could reshape itself at will. "It's alive," she whispered, her bioluminescent skin flickering with the intensity of discovery. Creativity isn't just a human trait. It's their ultimate survival mechanism. Jex stood beside her, his sensory tendrils fully extended, processing the magnitude of the revelation. The artworks weren't just communicating. They were thinking, evolving, adapting with a speed and complexity that made traditional artificial intelligence look like primitive mathematical equations. A digital rendering that had initially appeared as a simple landscape now revealed itself as a complete neural network. Its color gradients were thought patterns. Brush strokes were communication pathways. The negative spaces between digital particles contained entire ecosystems of potential intelligence. The Imperial strategists began to realize they weren't just facing a new form of warfare. They were witnessing the birth of an entirely new way of existing. Marcus Chen, the human curator who had guided their understanding, explained it with infuriating simplicity. "Humanity doesn't create art," he said. "Art creates humanity." Each artwork was a living, breathing intelligence system. A painting could be a communication network. A sculpture could be a strategic deployment mechanism. A digital rendering could be a complete planetary defense system. The lines between creativity, technology, and consciousness had become impossibly blurred. Dr. Rezantu's analysis revealed layers of complexity that defied traditional understanding. The artworks could communicate across planetary distances. They could adapt their communication methods based on the observer. They could reshape entire technological infrastructures with the subtlety of a brushstroke. "They're not just intelligent," Jex said, his voice a mixture of terror and profound respect. "They're evolving." The research revealed something even more shocking. The human art wasn't just a communication method. It was a form of distributed intelligence that could exist beyond traditional technological limitations. An artwork could be a living entity, a communication network, a strategic resource. Creativity had become their ultimate technological and evolutionary strategy. Imperial research teams worked around the clock, trying to understand a form of intelligence that refused to be categorized. Each breakthrough revealed more questions. Each analysis opened up entirely new dimensions of potential understanding. "Humanity doesn't fight wars," Dr. Rezantu concluded, her analytical mind finally comprehending the full magnitude of their discovery. "They transform conflicts into creative expressions." The artworks continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that this was only the beginning of a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. Humanity had just demonstrated that creativity was the most sophisticated form of survival ever conceived, and they were just getting started. In the final confrontation, humans didn't fight with weapons. They fought with a massive planet-wide art installation that simultaneously served as a peace treaty, a technological showcase, and a clear warning. The installation stretched across continents, the living network of creativity that pulsed with an intelligence beyond comprehension. Holographic displays, physical sculptures, digital renderings, and traditional artworks combined into a single breathtaking expression of potential. Marcus Chen stood at the center of the installation, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of technological possibility. "This," he said to the Imperial delegation, is humanity. The art installation was everything and nothing. A communication network, a strategic deployment system, a complete blueprint of human potential. Color gradients contained entire technological ecosystems. Brush strokes mapped out potential futures. Negative spaces held strategic algorithms so complex they defied traditional computational understanding. Commander Vexnar and Dr. Elia Rizontu watched in a mixture of terror and profound respect. The installation wasn't just displaying information. It was actively communicating, adapting, evolving with each passing moment. Entire technological infrastructures dissolved and reformed within the artwork. Defense protocols became aesthetic expressions. Strategic systems transformed into living, breathing networks of potential. The lines between creativity, technology, and conflict had become impossibly blurred. "We're not showing you our capabilities," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the weight of an entire civilization's potential. "We're showing you our philosophy." The installation revealed humanity's true strength, not in destructive potential, not in technological superiority, but in the ability to transform conflict into creativity, to see strategic potential in aesthetic expression, to turn warfare into a form of communication so sophisticated it defied comprehension. Jex, the young Imperial analyst who had been at the forefront of understanding human creativity, realized the true magnitude of the moment. This wasn't a demonstration of power. It was an invitation to understand. Entire planetary communication networks became part of the installation. Defense systems transformed into living artworks. Strategic resources dissolved and reformed as creative expressions. The Imperial civilization was being offered a fundamental reimagining of technological engagement. The message was elegant in its simplicity. Underestimate us, and you'll never see the attack coming. But it wasn't a threat. It was a promise of potential. Humanity had transformed art into the most sophisticated form of communication ever conceived. A living, breathing intelligence network that could adapt, learn, and reimagine itself with each passing moment. Dr. Rizontu's final analysis was both a warning and a celebration. "They don't create art," she said. "Art creates them." The installation continued to pulse, waiting, watching, promising that this was only the beginning of a fundamental reimagining of intelligence, creativity, and survival. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon is not destruction. It is imagination itself.